Hello and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by, well, Mr. Food, but you'll see in a minute. It's about better deception through knowing the script. Actually, I'm going to recommend not deceiving people a lot of the time, but we'll get into it. Mr. Food begins. A while ago, I got tired of social formalities and stopped engaging with them. One example is the classic, "How are you?" "Good, how about you?" I just answer directly and honestly. The person asking has to deal with my answer or confront the uncomfortable question of why they asked if they were unprepared in the first place. You'd think that someone who is always direct and honest is a person who's easy to deal with, but that is not the experience I've been having. A surprising amount of people become suspicious at me. These honest answers confuse them and they start wondering how I am trying to manipulate them. Now, being a speech level 100 master manipulator would be fun, but I'm lacking in energy, intelligence, and motivation to do that. I believe that this confusion is a result of wanting to know how the person across from you works. We want to know that they will follow the script of general society. If a person like me comes along, people get confused because my response isn't in the script, which led me to a thought. The most dangerous person isn't one who works outside the script. Instead, it's a person that convinces you that you have them figured out only for them to use that fact against you. In other words, the best liar is the one that makes you believe they are a bad liar. Yes, this is the parlay you asked for in June. I hope you like it. And I do like it. Mr. Food is referring to the parlay they did this June. Mr. Food has gotten parlay you've gotten parlay for a few years. And you sometimes do these parlay that are like a lightning round of what you think are bad ideas for parlay. That's a level of effort put into parlay that is rarely seen. You have so many parlay ideas and have made so many parlay that you have parlay about rejected parlay ideas. This is a level of parlaying that I didn't fully know would exist when I started doing this, and I think it's cool. So you did this fun thing in the one in June where you tried to cleverly give me like a boon for my birthday. My birthday is in the month of June. By saying that I could take one of them that you said was a bad idea, and I can elevate it to being a full parlay that you will pay me for and do for one of your parlay later this year. And that's what this is. Cool. A clever way to do a thing. Obviously, thank you for your business, but I genuinely think that was kind of smart. You sort of used my system to give me some kind of minor boon. I think that's nice. Thank you. Anyway, let's do it. So this is tricky. That doesn't make it a bad gift. It's interestingly tricky, but it's tricky. There are two reasons I think it's tricky. The first one is that if the topic of the parlay is taken to be the one I picked, which was the best liar is the one that makes you believe they're a bad liar, what is the best kind of lying, I think was the original one. If you take that as the topic of the parlay, how do we avoid making a parlay that isn't just a treatise on how to lie to people a lot for 40 minutes? You see what I mean? Not that that's the worst thing in the universe, I suppose, but I genuinely don't think you should do that most of the time. I suppose my solution to that is that I'm going to explain why I don't think you should do that most of the time. And then the topic becomes, well, when maybe there are a few situations where you would do that, what are they? You know, I guess. I don't know. So that's solvable. The second one is that by setting this parlay up, Mr. Fruit, you've added quite a bit of content that is interesting and worth discussing. But, well, I guess we should just get into it. It's going to take some setting up. So the kind of topic I want to begin with to go through Mr. Fruit's example and how we're going to get to lying by being a bad liar is talking about what I'm going to refer to as social metagaming. This is the idea that interacting with people in normal social situations has some game theory that can be used for benefits for both people. People are kind of already sort of social metagaming. That sounds hardcore. And understanding why is profitable. So, for example, let's begin by talking about the example you gave. You're in the grocery store checkout line, I don't know, and the person asks, "Hey, how you doing?" They're already not looking at you, they're checking out your stuff. They ask that for a few reasons. They ask that because it's in the social script, and it's kind of understood that they're not really asking, of course. When you say they have to confront the uncomfortable question of why they asked if they were unprepared in the first place, To some extent, I push back against that point. Like, they asked because they're required to as a customer service person, and because the social script says, oh, you're gonna ask and you're gonna get a throwaway answer, and that's the thing we're doing for some reason, though we'll get into that in a second. And so I don't think there's much to confront in the sense that we kind of all know that they don't really want to know. But on the other hand, they may begin to confront the level of automatedness with which that question is asked. And in fact, there is something odd going on here, isn't there? Because the thing that is the social convention is a statement that is a question. You see what's going on? Don't you think that if the purpose is for people to not say anything, to not respond, you would expect that the sort of evolved social convention would be a wording that doesn't invite an answer? You see what I mean? So for example, instead of saying, how are you, good, how about you, and no one's going to actually say anything about themselves, if the purpose is not to say anything about yourself, why isn't the established social convention something like, hey, hope you're doing well? It doesn't as much imply that you're meant to, and they'll say, oh, like, thanks, hope you're doing well too, and then you just go about your business. Now, I only live in one part of the world. Mr. Fruit only lives in one part of the world. Maybe there are some places where the way you do this thing, which probably exists in most parts of the world nowadays, is a formulation like that, where it's sort of not inviting conversation, but not inviting conversation. But I would like to suggest an alternative understanding that is that it's not a bug but a feature. The asking how the person is, but they're not really intended to respond, actually is intended to be like a very slight allowance for a response, because people often do kind of vent in this situation to give this social metagaming situation some feet. Let's think about reasons you might respond one way or another to being asked, hey, how you doing, in the grocery store line. And then maybe we can figure out, well, is there some benefit to it being formulated as a question that you aren't really intended to actually answer? Let's look at all the ways you might respond that I can think of anyway, and where they're coming from. So the first one is to just respond as normal. Why? What's the purpose of the scripted reasons? Well, it requires less mental bandwidth. You don't really have to sort of include another person in your empathy group or whatever. I forget that there's a name for this, but I've been trying to avoid things like that nowadays. The number of people you can keep in your head that you acknowledge as individuals. Maybe something you're not adding to that. If you kind of do a brush it off social encounter, you can be polite without needing to sort of include another person in your already overwhelmed brain. That's not bad necessarily. Being able to be polite on something of an autopilot sounds kind of bad, like you don't care about other people, but I think it's kind of good. It allows you to express that you intend to be courteous on a basic level and respect the other person, or at least the fact that they signed the social contract, respect them in some way, without really engaging with them. That isn't bad, in my opinion, necessarily. That has uses. So there's that. The customer service person can be nice without having to genuinely engage with every single person that they're checking out, because that would be exhausting and it's already a tough enough job. So, okay, that seems sensible. And that's what most people do, of course. Okay, how about what Mr. Foot did? So you're just saying you're answering directly and honestly. Now, I doubt that Mr. Foot is giving the customer service person their full life story. Mr. Foot, I imagine you're saying something like, it's one of those days. What's going on with you? And this is how I usually respond as well. What I would view this response as being is that we're sort of minimally staying in the script. You don't think that what I'm saying is nonsense that has nothing to do with what you said when you said, hey, how you doing? But we're just saying what we think instead of responding from the script. Now, why? It's not because, at least for me, I want you to know how I'm doing. I don't. I really don't. I don't want you to know how I'm doing, customer service person. It's not you, it's me. I don't want you to know how I'm doing to the point that I will avoid a grocery store I prefer because another one has self-checkout, just to avoid having some human interaction. Now, why is that? Well, for me, it's because when people are using the scripted response to avoid having like an empathy thing with someone, I would describe myself as I essentially can't do that. I just can't do it. I could say the response that is supposed to avoid having the empathy reaction with someone, but my brain has already jumped into their head. It's involuntary. I can't do anything about it. It feels physiological rather than mental, like there's a physical event happening where I immediately mirror neuron what's going on with the other person, and I don't want to be forced to care about the people around me all the time. It's exhausting. Why do I need to be so concerned with this random person? You know what I mean? I think I respect other people's well-being, but being deeply emotionally invested in people against my will is distressing. I don't want to do that. It's not them, it's me. They're perfectly pleasant. I'm thinking of 2 grocery stores I go to. The checkout people are like unusually nice. It's not because they're at all unpleasant. It's just because I don't like being looped into their empathy circuit or whatever. I don't know what's going on, but that's how I feel. I essentially can't get the benefit of the automated response, so it's easier for me to just say what I honestly think. There's kind of a subset here where you might not have that experience, but maybe you're just in the habit of being upfront about how you feel. You've kind of gotten the social scriptiness out of the way, which has various benefits. That could be this whole parlay, but I've decided I think this way of covering it is more interesting. A topic for another time. You could be in the habit of just not hiding what you actually think behind the social script, not relying on the social script. And then maybe it's actually easier for you to just respond genuinely. And again, this doesn't mean you'll dump your whole life story on the person. It might just mean you're going to say something that isn't the formulaic thing to say, which sounds like more effort, but it might not be. Again, these are all reasons why you might say how you're really feeling that are not motivated by venting. You don't actually want the other person to know how you feel. It's just genuinely easier for some reason to say the thing you actually think. Does that make sense? Just as a quick example, since we're not going to get into it in this parlay that much, about why it would be a beneficial habit to not use the social script, even though it sounds more difficult, I'll use myself because I am in this habit. And the reason for me it's much less difficult is because I stream for several hours a day, 3 days a week. That you get it. And parlay, of course, right? I'm going to be sitting here talking unscripted for many hours, like nearly an entire waking day of time once a week. About 1/7 of all of my waking time is going to be me talking off the cuff to people I don't directly know. You would fail to keep up some kind of facade of who you supposedly were, whether a manufactured one or just the social script, if you talked for that amount of time. I'm not a secret agent. I'm not going to successfully be someone other than who I am. So what the hell is the point? It's just pointless. It would end up making me seem two-faced. And it's not really beneficial for other reasons. For example, it's a great way to get to know people quicker, to just dispense with the pleasantries. They are pointless if you're actually going to get to know someone. They're primarily useful when you aren't going to get to know someone. And I think people just use them as a sort of springboard when they actually get to know people. They still do the pleasantries or the script at first. And then, in my opinion, the quicker you stop doing that, the quicker you actually get to know the person. I'm not sure people have fully absorbed that in modern society. Sometimes I've seen couples or friends that are people I met in college that I'm now seeing again after 5 or 7 years or whatever. And seeing their relationship, they've maybe been with someone for a few years, but they're still on the script. And I think you essentially don't know them. Like, you basically still don't know each other at all. And when you hear them talk to each other, it's like you indeed don't know each other at all, which is kind of frightening. To me anyway. I definitely don't think you should settle down without getting to know someone, because you knowing what you're getting into is a good thing. It takes effort to get to know people. But again, kind of a topic for another time. Just an example of why getting in the habit of being upfront would be good. It sounds like more effort, but really isn't. If you live a good life is the snarky way I'm going to put it. But obviously there are pros and cons. Just not really for me. Okay, and then the final point for this sort of social metagaming part of the parlay is that you might give the scripted response and then actually say how you feel to to genuinely vent your feelings. What's going on? Wouldn't it make more sense, like I was suggesting before, for the socially scripted response to be something that doesn't invite expressing yourself? That's like the entire point of having it, right? Well, I can't help but wonder if maybe that came about in society because people want to vent and have really bad support systems in their life. Maybe because they won't stop using the damn script all the time. But anyway, and therefore there's like a side benefit to the social script thing where you can kind of vent to a random stranger, which I don't understand this personally. I don't see how that would make you feel better, but I suppose logically, rather than keeping it inside from literally everyone, telling it to some random stranger might make you feel like a completely minuscule, pointless level better. And I feel like it's kind of rude. Like, just by the way, I don't think this is a nice thing to do. They don't really need to have your problems dumped on them. They're kind of trapped if you do that. I think people shouldn't do this because it is putting the other person under duress. But people do it, and a lot. I mean, you hear people actually saying how they feel. So you can't help but wonder if that's maybe part of where that's coming from. We're going to be coming back to this idea that we set up about there being a kind of the social script isn't all the things that people want to do. There are things people want to do under the surface, and you can sometimes play that to your advantage in some way. We're going to come back to that idea that's been set up. But I thought it was worth spending about half the parlay talking about this sort of social metagaming thing, because I think it's interesting. Now, obviously, this is really dipping our toes in. This is a ridiculously complicated subject, and it's a lot of fun to talk about for a parlay, by the way. I think this is, if you wanted to pick something I would have fun with, well, I kind of picked it, but then you set it up a little more. Mr. Food, I think you picked a subject that I enjoy talking about. I think this is a fascinating subject that I'll tell you personally for a few minutes. I have had a very complicated history with. When I was in high school, most of high school, and before, I was very, very shy. Like, a lot of people had not spoken to me levels of shy. I had a babysitter who, for a lot of my young life, that I rarely spoke with. Not because she was awful or anything, though. Anyway, it was a mixed bag, but that wasn't why. I was just quiet. I was a reserved kid. I was very shy and I wasn't very confident with myself. In high school, a lot of stuff happened, a lot of good and a lot of bad, that made me sort of open up by default. I sort of felt like, well, there's nothing to lose, so I might as well give that a try. And I did spend a lot of time, I think I've mentioned in some parlay before, running coffee houses. This is what my fancy, very small high school that was in an abandoned mansion called, basically like a like show and tell. But people would, play music or read poetry, and the tone was pretty mellow. Like, it wasn't usually rock music, sometimes the vibe, but not always the vibe. It was mostly poetry and chill music. And there would be sometimes other things. People would read short stories. Occasionally there was something a little bit out of left field. My partner at the time did like dance for part of it, and it was a difficult space to do that in, so she had to kind of adapt the routine. Anyway, that was interesting. I ran that. I did all the lighting, and I set up the recording for it, because this gives you an idea of this prissy private school I went to where they recorded this. And I would also generally break the ice by going first, because these rich kids were cowards, and I, as the many things I am not, I am definitely a somewhat gregarious person when it comes to going first. I just don't see that as being a burden. It's easiest to go first, in my opinion. So I would generally do it because other people don't agree with that. And I guess this helped me open up and gain some confidence, or it made me realize that I'm not that confident, but everybody else is just as bad, which I guess is how a lot of people maybe eventually get over it. It's not that you become confident. You just understand that actually everyone is nervous and most of them are just faking it. And the very few people that aren't, it's not because they're brave, it's because they're stupid. They're just ignorant of the fact that there is a lot of social pressure directed at them. And maybe that's not bad. It might be blissful ignorance, but I don't think it's because they're like amazingly courageous most of the time. That takes a lot of effort that I don't think you've had time to make for most people at that young age. And I guess because of that, in college, I tried to open up a lot more and I pushed around with the social boundaries quite a bit. College is a place where the way I would frame it is that you have kind of like a social occasion in a way you don't a lot of other times in life. On the college campus, as long as there's a meaningful college campus, and if you are not yet in college, some of you watching this probably aren't in college, for this reason, I would strongly recommend going to a college that has like a defined inner campus that isn't like just in a city and there is no real campus, because I think this effect is magnified in those environments. You kind of have a like a small town area, town-like area where people are by default a little bit more free and able to socialize than they would be in other open areas like a city or something. The people that are there are, if they're sitting around, kind of more free by default than usual. And so, provided you can be very respectful of other people's space and not impose yourself, it isn't the worst place to try to say hello to a new person and get to know people. You do have a kind of social excuse to engage with other people that I can't think of many other situations in life where you have in the same way. You get to kind of live in a space where people are just sort of around. For in my social experience so far, in my economic bracket, in my part of the world, you can't get that thing at any other point in your life. And so I did that a lot. A lot of it, in my opinion, was heavy-handed. I was more excited about getting to know people and didn't think enough about, well, am I imposing on people? Now, I don't think it's entirely fair to say I really hurt anyone by doing that. I just said, hey, is it okay if I sit here or whatever, tried to talk to the person, and then left if I felt I was being a nuisance. If people don't always say, hey, I would like it if you left, actually, I don't think that that's entirely my fault. But where I'm going to be going with this parlay is that I do think I was the active agent in many of those situations. And therefore, in some cases, I should have known that they're not going to say no. And therefore, I should just not even bother. You know what I mean? That's hard to do. That is hard to do. And again, I'm tempted to argue that people really ought to make more of an effort to really say, if the person is trying to be cautious and isn't just gregariously sitting down in the seat, they're saying, hey, can I sit here? They're already sitting down. And instead they're sheepishly in the corner saying, would it be all right if I sat down for a bit? Yeah, you might feel bad for them. It's like there's no way around it. People are just gonna say yes. But it sure would be a good society if people would say no when what they thought was no. That's all I'm trying to say. That being said, where this parlay is going is that in that situation in college, I think I'm guilty many times of something pretty much anyone who tries to be outgoing is guilty of, which is not assuming enough that other people really aren't going to say how they really feel. And therefore, I should have been more aggressive, thinking, okay, realistically, they probably don't want that thing. But I would still be defensive and say, you know what? I wouldn't have met anyone if I did that. And I did make many longtime friends doing this thing, engaging with people that I wouldn't naturally have run into. So personally, I feel like if all I did was very quietly, somewhat shyly chat up some random stranger for 5 minutes, did I really hurt them that badly in a public college setting where they're not in any way unsafe, and I just left after a few minutes if it seemed like they weren't interested in talking or whatever? Is that really that bad? I'm worried about this because I don't want you all to impose yourselves on people, but I also have to teach myself to stop trying to make a channel where I'm worried that everything I say will cause people to act in a harmful way, because it's good to care about that, but like I can't stop every single thing people might do. This is all I have to say about this. Anyway, having had that experience as a young adult in college, and having the experience in my adult life as I left college, realizing that if I hadn't gotten to know more people that way, I would have ran out of people to be close to already. I would sort of already be screwed if my past self hadn't done that. And I'm very thankful that I did decide to do that, for all the pros and cons, because I approached it with some tact, as best I could anyway. While it's a compromise, I still think that it resulted in me having a dramatically better life than I otherwise would have had. And I would not be a happy person if I had not done that now, I don't think. That really was the best decision I ever made in my entire life. I would strongly recommend going to a college where you can see people doing that, because I think that that is the overwhelmingly most valuable thing you can get out of going to college. Anyway, now I've been kind of rethinking over the way that I engage with people like that and trying to figure out what a better way to approach it would be. So now we're going to get into, for the sort of end cap of the parlay, the idea of manipulating people by social metagaming, which I know it seems like I've been kind of avoiding for a lot of this parlay. And the reason is that I usually think you shouldn't do that. For the most part, what you would do would be the same as if you were just honest. So, for example, a lot of these people, I might try to wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit. I think one way to get to know people better is if you're the one sort of breaching their social space, maybe trying to be a little vulnerable is good. Give them a hand a little bit and don't act like fully armored, you're charging the castle and they just have to like open up about themselves or whatever. You need to be ready to share things about yourself and be unsafe a little bit. Maybe open to criticism, maybe a little uncomfortable. Do I feel self-conscious, maybe a little hurt by some things that happened to me during this time in my life? I do, but you know what? I think that that's the price you pay. If you're going to engage with people you don't know at all, you have to be ready for them to not be totally nice. Where the hell did you come from? And I think people mostly were actually curt and tactful at worst. It isn't that bad. Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, it would be, you could think, well, socially, I could be awkward and then people will feel sorry for me. And I did that on purpose. And then they'll give me the time of day. And then I secretly become really outgoing and confident. And then they'll like want to spend time with me. You could do that on purpose to manipulate people and it would work, I guess. But a couple of things. So first of all, it would be like, what's the point? You're going to get closer to them, but you can't escape them finding out who you are. Again, at the end of the day, if you spend a lot of time with them, they're going to learn who you actually are. You're not a CIA agent. You're not that they can do that either, usually. You're not going to successfully pretend to be someone you're not. So it's just kind of pointless, I think. The second thing is that you'll probably do this anyway. A lot of people not having the self-control of a secret agent, you will likely be shy and people might take pity on you and talk to you a little bit if you seem really awkward, because it's just awkward sometimes. And that will be why you start talking with people. And there's not much avoiding that. So to some extent, I feel like the manipulation thing is just sort of redundant, I would almost say. It's just kind of going to happen anyway. So what's the point of like acting like you're doing it on purpose? You could theoretically do it on purpose. I don't know. But I don't think you gain anything from this. I'm not trying to say you should just be nice, be a good person, even though you can massively benefit from manipulating people. I'm not saying that. I'm trying to argue that it is genuinely pointless to do it. You genuinely don't gain much of anything by doing that thing. In fact, all of the successful moments I had with people were generally those where there was not much script. They were things where the person dropped the script to begin with. I think one of the more useful ways to use the social scripting, social conventions and stuff to meet people you'll enjoy spending time with is just to not use them from the start and see if the person you're talking to also doesn't use them from the start, and then spend time with those people. And I would say of the people that I talked to in college in this way I'm describing, it was those people that I tended to hold on to because they were the open people that were ready to have a human relationship that is about being opened up. And so I don't know, to me, it's like, that's the better kind of metal detector. But I'm not going to get away from it. Even if this parlay is supposed to be a gift to me, I'm not going to end the parlay without saying something about how you would manipulate people or whatever. I don't really feel like there's that many broad benefits to this, though. But if you insist, and you should insist, I'm the one who invited the parlay. So I think because of that, it's perfectly valid for someone to say, no, you have to present examples of deceiving people by acting like you're a bad liar. Okay. The one that comes to mind is, usually it's being foolish, I think. It's taking the approach that if you do something that seems risky, like you're in a social or formal setting and you don't quite know what the courtesies or the rules are, or you don't quite care what they are, and there's not much harm to be done. I'm very self-conscious about encouraging people to do bad things in the world, I guess, but that's not my job. It's good to care about that, but maybe I'm a little hung up on that. I can't really think of an example. That's the problem. But the idea would be that you would sort of feign ignorance by default and put yourself in the position of someone learning. So if you get a speeding ticket, I've never gotten a speeding ticket, but if you get a speeding ticket, saying, "Oh, I wasn't going that fast," or whatever, or "Come on, give me a break," or whatever, probably won't work. Like it seems fairly obvious to me that the better approach, the probably best approach, normal approach, is to say, "Man, I I'm really sorry I was speeding. I should have thought more about, this, that, and the other thing. I should have realized this is not worth going really fast." If you say, "Well, it's because I didn't know I was speeding," well, that's why they're giving you the speeding ticket, so you pay more attention. So you can't do that. But then you don't want to come across as, "I knew I was speeding. I'm already with the response. I'm so sorry I was speeding. I won't do it again." It's almost like you're saying, "Please don't give me a ticket." That probably won't work as well either. But if you can say it like they tell you were speeding, and then you sort of grasp the gravity of the situation and feign the idea that you're in that moment kind of learning a lesson, I think that's the most likely to get you off if you wanted to avoid getting the speeding ticket. Again, I'm just don't speed anyway, but yes, you get it. And so not really appearing foolish, but learning as you go, or sort of presenting a story. So the idea is that you're appearing to be very open, but in a way that is performative, sort of telling the story of the thing. I just don't really feel like that's exactly lying. Like a lot of the time when I make videos, or when I'm talking to you right now, my brain is doing a little thing where this is just how I speak normally to some extent. But I do a thing as I'm making Parley or a stream or a video where I try to sort of talk out the thought process a little more than I really need to myself, so that it's easier to follow. Like I maybe wouldn't include as many in-between words or explain the same thing a different way, which can be helpful for a lot of people when retaining information through speech only, if it weren't for having an audience. You see what I mean? But that's not really lying, in my opinion. Again, it's creating truth by adding detail that is redundant, like, or artificially adding detail, I guess. Which makes it sound a little bit like I'm figuring out what I have to say as I'm saying it to you. But if I didn't do that, it would just be less clear what I was saying. I'm not doing it to make it seem like I'm figuring it out in the moment, as much as doing it so you can figure out what I'm talking about. You see what I'm trying to say? But you, of course, could do it to deceive people and speak in a way that makes it sound like you just realized this thing, and the officer feels like, wow, well, they did learn their lesson, so maybe I won't give them a ticket. They're being humble, they're being vulnerable. A lot of police officers are probably power tripping on that job. Maybe that's a good enough way to sort of get them off about that, and then you don't need to be given a ticket. Or they feel like they did something good and then they took pity on you and didn't give you a ticket or whatever. I guess that's the example that comes to mind. I know that's kind of weak. It's like, that's not really, as I said, I feel like that's not really lying, but you can do it in a more artificial way. So you could say, if you wanted to go shop for Halloween candy and you were supposed to invite a friend because they said they really wanted to do that with you, and you just don't because you're being lazy, and you're being lazy, and you just don't invite them and you go, and then they're upset afterward. You could say, "Oh, well, I forgot." But that just sounds thoughtless. And so you could restructure it as saying, "Man, I really should have put the extra thought into bringing you with me. That would have made it more fun for me." And it's like you're realizing that in the moment. But I guess my problem is you should think it would have been more fun for them to come with you. You see what I mean? Like, it's only a lie if you're an idiot. Like, you should just not be an idiot, and then it wouldn't be lying to say that. It would, I think it would be better if you did this to me. I would rather you just say, I was lazy and decided not to take the time to invite you because I wanted to go right now, but I regret that decision. Like, fine. You know what I mean? That's okay. I think that's fine. I wish you didn't. You're right. You should have invited me. It would have been more fun. What, you spent money on cavities? Like, big deal. We could have done it together. I don't know. So that's my issue. Is I honestly most of the time feel like the things you'd be constructing to use the social metagaming thing as a lie shouldn't be a lie. Like, ideally, you would just actually think those things. It benefits you to believe that that is true. So then there really isn't the lying. I don't know. It's not like there are never times to lie. I don't know. But in this way, so I guess we have to think of an example. And in the original parlay, I did give an example that I've just been avoiding because it feels sort of redundant. It's sort of pointless. But I guess I'll say it again here. I'll talk through it again here a little. In the June parlay, when this what makes you a good liar thing came up, I talked about the sort of social metagaming with different types of liars. So, for example, I was talking about how, depending on what you're trying to do, lying, that was what I was focused on there. Different types of lying might be good. So, for example, if you're in an environment where, let's say, you and I, viewer, and Mr. Food, or Mr. Food, you can pick someone else to be locked in your room. The three of us, Mr. Food, Zandy, and the viewer, Mr. Food, you'll have to pick someone else, are locked in a room together. And we've all been told that one person is deceiving the others and has $1 million hidden or something. We know someone is lying. So certain types of lying are more effective now that we know there is a liar in the midst. For example, acting foolish like this doesn't seem very effective if you know there is someone deceiving someone. In my example with the speeding ticket, well, there are people who are ignorant of the fact they're speeding, not ignorant of the fact they're speeding, not ignorant and wanting to avoid a ticket, not ignorant and generally learning. You get the idea. But in this situation, we know you're deceiving people, like someone is deceiving people. So doing something where you've already been informed that there's someone deceiving others and you act like really foolish or like very naive, there's just no way that's real. You know what I mean? It puts you in a position where the other people immediately know that sticks out. You're probably just faking it. But if you were to be dodgy and reserved, that feels like an appropriate response when you think people are going to suspect you. So while both reactions indicate that you have something to hide, one of them feels a little more real, and thus I think gains a kind of inherent defense in this situation. It feels more like a response that you could have that response without there being a reason to have it. You see what I mean? And in the game theory of this situation, it feels like there really isn't a benefit to pointing out that you are lying. You know what I mean? You're pretending to be naive and saying, whoa, someone is hiding the money. That's such a surprise. Like, that just sounds like forcedly foolish in a way that draws attention to you. But what benefit is there to that unless you are not the person lying? So unless you're with people who are incredibly metagamey oriented people, you're probably just putting a target on yourself. It seems kind of pointless. If you did it to deflect attention from you, most people, you've probably made it more likely they're going to think you're the one lying. It's not going to work as a way to keep people off of you. But if you just become neutral to a point, well, okay, that it's a good start. But then what starts to happen is people think, well, but there's nothing about you. You're just a black box. As soon as we heard someone was lying, you got all reserved and said, oh, well, I don't know who it is. You know, it feels like the most natural response, but because suddenly there's just no information about you, the other people are chatting it up or whatever, you become suspicious through, like, later in the conversation, probably. So the point of that example in the original parlay was to illustrate that it kind of depends. If you're trying to lie, it sort of depends what the situation is, what would be a better kind of metagame play. And as the conversation goes on, what the other people do will change what is good for you to do to some extent, like metagaming, general game theory metagaming. And I guess that's my takeaway here is that being a bad liar is primarily effective when people don't know if there is lying taking place. If they do know there's lying taking place, it sounds forcibly naive, in my opinion, and thus it doesn't really work. But the approach where you act open and ready to learn is an effective approach. I just feel like it's an even better approach if that isn't a lie. Like if you're not feigning doing that. I don't know if that really makes sense, but I guess my conclusion is that the if the lying is to be effective, if it's about what's effective, the most effective approach is to do the thing that would be a good way to lie, but have it be true. That seems good. Genuinely trying to puzzle things out is a good approach. Being willing to act like you're here to learn and genuinely being there to learn is good. It's not like magically a worse lie or a worse stance. I don't know. If you really are willing to learn, you know what I mean? If you speed, which is a bad thing to do generally, and you're going to be given a ticket, and you act like, oh, I learned my lesson in this moment. It's not worse if you actually did learn your lesson in that moment. I guess that's my point. I don't know. I think that's all I have to say. I don't know. I wish I had more. It wasn't a very lie parlay, I guess. But if it's my parlay, I would say what I was interested to talk about was why I think you usually don't benefit from doing that. Shouldn't, because it is more beneficial to behave another way, according to me. But it doesn't mean that there's nothing to be gained by that type of behavior. I just argue it's usually even better to actually feel that way. And of course, there are situations where this type of deception doesn't work very well. Again, if everybody knows that there's someone being deceptive, it kind of draws attention to you for very little profit, as far as I can tell, unless the other people are very, very metagamey. I talked about levels, I think, in the first parlay. In June, I probably brought up the concept of, if people are working on a higher level of counterplay, then if you say, whoa, I have no idea who's lying, and draw a ton of attention to yourself, if everybody knows that everybody is metagaming, suddenly that becomes really confusing. It's like, well, but why would you do that? And that creates some second guessing. But I think for most humans, that's not an effective approach. It's probably better to play it straight, go by the book, and just try to create honesty in the environment. Being a little bit genuinely distressed at the right time, for example, is probably effective. That doesn't seem suspicious, I think, to a lot of people. I don't know, but then being to some extent calm too. I don't know. There's a sort of optimal behavior, I think, for normal non-metagaming people. And it probably isn't acting like you're a bad liar. But indeed, people that are manipulating the social script, it does put a bit of a target on your head. I guess the last thing I want to say is that I agree, Mr. Food, that one of the perils of trying to just be honest is that if you really don't think about the social script at all, you're liable to make people suspicious, even though your goal is to remove that sort of facade. And so responding in a way that kind of keeps to the script a little, but then adds in what you actually have to say for whatever reason that we talked about at the beginning, is maybe a more effective approach. Trying to immediately jump off book indicates a kind of recklessness that could make people uncomfortable. And so I guess the sort of bad liar type of thing is to lead as if everything is as normal and then, get off of the script and say what you want to say. I just feel like usually that's so minimal. Like all it would be is just the very first time you introduce yourself, maybe you just do a normal introduction, and then like the first actual conversation, you stop it with the social script and say, things actually about you and the other person, and you have a conversation. You know what I mean? So that is another thing I had to say. I just don't have too much to elaborate on about that. We could do a whole other parlay again about the sort of social metagaming with the script. I didn't totally think that was the topic for this parlay, but my main note about that would just be that if you do this, you quickly learn that it's effective to pull back a little bit to some extent. You can get people to feel a lot more comfortable if you demonstrate that you do know the script and you're just clearly, deliberately choosing to do something a little bit different. That is much more effective than doing something totally random. That seems, being completely ignorant of the script seems bad. In that sense, I think that the claim is kind of wrong. The best liar is the one that makes you think they're a bad liar. If bad here means bad at the script, no, I don't think that's effective. I think that demonstrating proficiency with the social, accord, but then not using it deliberately and establishing that that's a choice is useful. Kind of like if a game uses a common framework for some kind of gameplay mechanic, but then they're gonna do something that they know is exactly the opposite of how this usually works. It seems wise to put in a little detail where the game acknowledges that this isn't how it normally works. Something like that. A quick example would be in Dead Cells, stacking up one stat of a certain, they have colors, so purple, green, or red. Stacking up one stat actually gives you more of a benefit each time you get it. Normally, stacking one damage multiplier would be bad because you get the same amount, or a lot of games give you less each time, and you already have more each time, which means it's worth less and less each time, even if the game doesn't give you less and less each time, which they often do. But in Dead Cells, if you pick red and then red again, you actually get more red damage the second time. The game is compensating for the diminishing returns, which means it's good to stack one stat. Or it would be equal, except that the stats generally don't multiply or add up. Which is different from how almost all other games do it. In almost every other game that I've ever played, there's no reason not to mix different stats. But in Dead Cells, there's a reason to mix different stats. Now, the game does show you that you're getting more of the stat each time. So if you know about this fundamental math, then that's enough, I guess. But for a lot of players, it does seem kind of weird. Maybe they would figure it out over time. A lot of players tend to overfocus their build, and I guess the difficulty is that is suboptimal in nearly every game except for Dead Cells. Players will take a weapon and say, oh, this is a crit weapon, so I'll build only crits, which in nearly every game is worse than building a little bit of every stat, even if the weapon has good crit stats. But in Dead Cells it isn't, but people just already make that mistake. And so there is a method to the madness of looking at what people tend to do and calling to that a little bit before you do your thing that I think is effective. And that's actually kind of the opposite of the make you believe you're a bad liar. Sort of demonstrating some proficiency with the script and then saying, well, I'm going to go off the book a little bit, is effective. That being said, you could interpret the bad liar thing as meaning, oh, well, you say the normal pleasantries, but then you seem a bit awkward, and this is something a little bit different, but it feels organic instead of forced. And then people will, let their guard down and trust you. That works. I was just arguing before that it's not bad to just genuinely do that. There's really no disadvantage, just that is an effective approach to actually believe and do on purpose, truthfully. I think I've beat that dead horse enough. Okay, an interesting parlay, I hope. Thank you very much for the birthday gift, Mr. Food. Thank you for your patronage. You've done a lot of parlay over the years. I thought it was nice that you figured out a way to do one that was kind of a gift. Folks, if you want your own parlay like this, you can check out how to get that in the description. For now, looking forward to the next one. Thanks very much.